This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and today it's Friday, it's February 9th, 2024. This is a special broadcast. I want to feature the Tucker Carlson interview yesterday that was broadcast with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. And I want to help to decode it because I think there's a lot of background here and it takes a little bit of discernment to figure out what was happening. Now, Tucker traveled to Moscow, and he sat down for over 2 hours with Vladimir Putin and got an interview. Now, it's hard to watch the interview for a couple of different reasons. One is that there's a fundamental difference in style between diplomacy as done in Europe and done in the United States, or even journalism. Now, Tucker Carlson is used to the U.S. style of journalism, which is you ask a question and you want an answer. And the answer is usually short, and you're dealing largely in talking points. You're not getting into deep explanations. So our journalists have gotten used to this because they go to a press conference, they pick up the talking points, they report on what was said, the highlights, and that's the end of the deal. There's not much analysis. A few paragraphs of analysis might get tacked on at the end. And when you're dealing with the New York Times or the Washington Post, they tack on their ideological interpretation of the event to try to spin it with their narrative of the day. Now, what was going on yesterday is much more complicated than that. Because first of all, the Tucker was there involved some reaching out by Putin and his staff to reach and connect with Tucker Carlson to want to back channel the interview. Now, back channeling is, I'm going to explain it in terms of the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis when Jack Kennedy was president. We discovered that Russia had placed, and that was Nikita Khrushchev, who was the premier at that time in Russia, had placed nuclear weapons in Cuba, which was 90 miles from Florida, the coast of Florida. And of course, this was a major strategic threat to the United States. We were at that time considering the Western Hemisphere to be our sphere of influence, that we still do to a large extent, although China's made a lot of penetration into the Western Hemisphere that we've allowed. At any rate, at that time, Kennedy knew he had to get those missiles out of Cuba. His presidency was at risk. And our military, Curtis LeMay was one of the Joint Chiefs. In World War II, Curtis LeMay had overseen strategic bombing. And in Europe, he firebombed Dresden and a number of other cities. He learned how to create a firestorm. He killed thousands of people. And in Japan, Curtis LeMay realized that the houses were made largely of paper. And he firebombed Tokyo, probably killed more people in Tokyo with firebombing than we did with the atomic weapons. He was insane in wanting to bomb, and he wanted to go to war. Curtis LeMay wanted to go to war with Russia, nuclear war with Russia in 1962, because the Joint Chiefs figured we had a strategic advantage over the Soviet Union at that time in missile capability. And fundamentally, Kennedy realized that this was serious. These generals were utilizing this crisis. And in fact, I think it's probably one of the reasons Kennedy was assassinated, was because he did not want to go to nuclear war. Instead, what they did is they back-channeled Nikita Khrushchev. Kennedy found a way to send a message to Khrushchev through some of the Russian diplomats in the United States that said, we don't want to go to war. And he exchanged a telegram. At that time, they had a red phone, hotline. They could talk between Moscow and the White House, Kremlin and the White House. And a message was sent to Khrushchev. And Khrushchev responded with a message that was very accommodating. Now, that got confused because as soon as the generals in the Soviet Union realized what Khrushchev had done, they reversed the message. And Kennedy decided to ignore the second message. And they continued back channeling. And because Kennedy and Khrushchev did not want to go to war, the blockade was successful of Cuba, and Russia pulled out its missiles. from Cuba. We subsequently pulled out our missiles from Turkey. So it wasn't a complete unilateral win for Kennedy, but the war was avoided. Now, what's going on here is the same context, because it has to be seen in that Medvedev, who is the former Russian president, Dmitry Medvedev, has been making overtures to get a back channel established. Again, this is because the context is that what Russia sees is the potential of a nuclear war. And Medvedev also put out a statement yesterday. He gave a direct statement. He said, for the first time, and this was published, Zero Hedge had an article about it. It was published yesterday, in the same day that Tucker Carlson's was broadcast. And what Medvedev said was that a direct war between Moscow forces and NATO could lead to a nuclear apocalypse. He said the current deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council issued the warning on Telegram Wednesday, the day before the Thursday broadcast by Tucker, in response to recent statements and reports that some European leaders are telling their populations to, quote, prepare for war. For example, just last month, United Kingdom's Army Chief, General Patrick Sanders, called on authorities to, quote, mobilize the nation, mobilize Great Britain, to prepare for war with Putin. The population needs a shift in thinking to be ready. Medvedev mocked this and other examples of NATO leaders accusing Moscow of seeking a broader war as dangerous drivel. He said this was all about trying to bolster support for sending more weapons to Kiev amid what has become war fatigue among Western politicians. So, according to Russian media, Medvedev said that this is part of an effort to prop up Ukraine, a country that is foreign to taxpayers. And he said that the leaders of NATO are beginning to broadcast to prepare for war with Russia and to continue to help with Ukraine. So what Medvedev explained is, since our military capabilities are incomparable, they have hypersonic missiles that we do not have, not to the degree that Russia has hypersonic missiles. Since our military capabilities are incomparable, we will simply have no choice. The response will be asymmetrical. That means if NATO started a conventional war, Russia's response would be out of proportion, over the top. Russia would unleash a nuclear attack on the United States. To protect the territorial country of our country, ballistic and cruise missiles with special warheads would be used. This will be the proverbial apocalypse, the end of everything. Okay, now in what Medvedev did was set the stage for Putin. Putin came on yesterday, and he started with a long history lesson on Ukraine. And it takes a lot of discipline and history and knowledge of what he was talking about to really understand what he was saying. This is typical European style diplomacy. And Putin was not giving a press conference. He was engaging in a diplomatic lesson. He was delivering a diplomatic message to the leaders of the United States. Now, what he talked about with Ukraine was an explanation how, going back to the 900s, centuries ago, when Russia was formed by tribes that lived in this European Asian country that today is Russia, Ukraine was part of Russia. And historically, he went through decade by decade in the 1900s, what had happened with Ukraine, how the western part of Ukraine was fighting with the Nazis, the eastern part was fighting with Russia in World War II. He detailed Poroshenko, who was the president of Ukraine prior to Zelensky, and how Soros and the State Department produced what they called the Maidan Rebellion, which is part of the Obama administration color revolutions in which they were destabilizing countries and toppling their leaders. Yanukovych was the president at that time in the Maidan Rebellion. He was close to the Russians. He was duly elected as president of Ukraine. And Stalin said, basically, come back to Russia. You're not safe there. In the overthrow of the government, the coup d'etat that Soros and the State Department arranged, they put in Poroshenko, who was tilted towards NATO. And through Victoria Nuland, who's part of the Atlantic Council, but also part of the State Department, they began channeling to get NATO to accept membership for, extend membership to Ukraine, which would put Ukraine on the border of Russia, blocking Russia's access to the Black Sea, which is Russia's access to the Atlantic through the Mediterranean. And the State Department started putting military bases in Scandinavia. We now have 47 military bases in Scandinavia. And again, getting NATO to extend an invitation for membership to Finland. Finland is Russia's access to the Atlantic from the north through the Baltic Sea. These are very aggressive moves. And Putin explained how when the Berlin Wall came down, which was in the end of the 1990s, he felt, and the other Russians felt, that the West would welcome this non-communist Russia into an economic partnership with the West and the United States, including the European Union and the United States. Putin would have felt this would be very favorable for the Russian economy to be able to engage in commerce more broadly outside of Russia with strong Western nations. And at the time, the State Department again and the CIA stepped in and would not allow that to happen. Now, why? Well, today I think we can see that how much of our State Department and our CIA has been taken over by the woke. The woke is a neo-Marxist message. It's a neo-Marxist destroy America meme that was intentionally crafted in order to have our military worry more about DEI and have generals going around wearing dresses and wigs, giving orders to the troops. It's dysfunctional, and it was intended and crafted to be dysfunctional from within the CIA and within the Democratic Party. And it has taken over our institutions. And the messaging was coming out, even Tucker Carlson, when he was debriefing himself in front of the cameras, sitting in the Kremlin after the interview with Putin. He said, I have not had time to think this through. But he said, our leaders who have been in this insanity of the State Department trying to go to war with Russia are virtually on the edge of doing so. And he talked specifically about Victoria Nuland sitting in there and saying she was insane to want to do this. So in the interviews where now they're getting pretty widely distributed on X, you can see these two interviews that Tucker Carlson did right immediately after the interview with Putin. They're being very broadly expanded because what Putin was delivering the message that Russia does not want to go to nuclear war. Now, there's only one reason Russia is doing this. And what it means to me, and I don't have any reason to know this. I mean, this is now my understanding of politics and my ability to see things without being told. I know the back channeling is occurring. I've been aware of that part I have been told. But what I'm about to tell you, I have not been told, but I sense is true. That is, Putin is making these exceptional moves because he is convinced that our State Department and our CIA would go to nuclear war, perhaps as the October surprise in 2024, to keep Trump out of the White House. Now, that's a preposterous thought. But then you put it together with several points, namely that after the fall of the Berlin Wall, when Russia renounced communism, the Democratic Party, which has always been a neo-Marxist party since about 1919, when Russia went communist, and the Democratic Party has always been sympathetic. The socialism is the front door to communism. They've been using Cloward Piven, and right now Biden administration, and Biden is not in charge. And Putin made that absolutely clear. And again, remember, Russia has extensive spying ability. Russia's tapped into many of our systems, and Putin is not going to reveal his sources of information or even all that he knows. But he's telegraphing here that, in fact, he knows that the NATO is contemplating a nuclear war. Now, that's unbelievable until you put it together with the World Economic Forum and Harari and the others who are saying this is a depopulation movement. There's too many billions of people. And if that's the case, there's no better way to eliminate them than a nuclear war. And in some kind of a nuclear crisis, an election could be suspended. I don't think that the move in the Supreme Court on the 14th Amendment is going to succeed for lawfare. I think enough justices in the Supreme Court see that this is a ridiculous argument and a subterfuge to keep Trump off the ballot. If Trump's on the ballot, his chances of winning are exceptionally good. The other thing that was happening in the same period of time was the Department of Justice came out with a special prosecutor report saying that Biden was suffering from dementia. Now, this again has two impacts. Number one, it took a lot of the energy and the heat away from Putin to admit that Biden has dementia. And the mainstream media has largely ignored Tucker Carlson's interview because, again, it was complicated. He went on to, you had to listen to 2 hours. He's giving a history lesson to American journalists. That's boring. And they do not want Putin covered because Putin was putting out a sympathetic message. He was saying, we don't want war. We want accommodation. The war in Ukraine needs to come to an end and be negotiated. He said, we do not have aspirations to take over Eastern Europe or to defeat NATO. We don't want to go with war with NATO. He's giving all these messages. But Dementia Joe is another counter psyop in order to get attention away from what Putin was communicating to the American people. Now, it's serious that the Department of Justice put that out yesterday because now with the Department of Justice saying that Biden has been showing signs of mental dementia going back to his vice presidency. And for this reason, we're excusing him of all prosecution because we think he's mentally incompetent. So they've just given Biden a clean pass. And they're not probably going after Hunter either in any serious capacity. And what Putin is suggesting, and Tucker Carlson is repeating here, and it's now a number of people who are kind of in the know are saying that Ukraine is being kept over and fought over, number one, because the arms dealers and the arms manufacturers are making a fortune. It's their payday. Biden's printing billions and billions of dollars and giving them a payday. We don't even know where that money's going. A lot of it's being stolen. It's also the center for children being sold into sex slavery. All these children who are abandoned by parents or their parents are killed in Ukraine as Ukraine is being decimated by Russia come out for safety alone. They're easy targets to be picked up by pedophiles who are looking for children to put into sex slavery. And it's also the greatest money laundering center in the world. I know I've caught HSBC of money laundering in 2011, and the CIA is, I think, has always been in the drug business since before World War II started. And it would not surprise me to see the CIA involved in the pedophilia. Certainly the Jeffrey Epstein revelations that have come out so far, which are only the tip of the iceberg, have indicated that there are massive numbers of our politicians who have been co-opted by sex operations, pedophilia in particular. And stories are coming out that much of the Congress has been compromised by drug and sex parties in Washington. And of course, this kind of honey trap setups are a great way to be compromised because now they're subject to blackmail. And once that has been recorded and documented, they might have had a good sex party drug night, but they now are owned by those who set up the party in order to blackmail them. It's so simple to get our politicians. Doesn't even cost very much for China to compromise our Congress. All of our institutions are broken. Now, Russia is not wanting at this point for America to go down the drain with all of this nonsense of the woke. A destabilized America because we self-destruct. And the Biden administration is in there now spending, so much debt that our GDP is not growing to the extent that we think it is. It's fueled by deficit spending. So we're spending about $2.50 in deficit money made up, fiat currency, in order to create $1 of GDP. And the middle class, as a consequence, is being hammered because real earnings have not increased for the middle class, yet gasoline, food, and other prices, housing, rents for apartments have all gone extremely high. And the jobs created in this Bidenomics are not massive job creations. People are working 2 and 3 jobs in order just to keep ends meeting. The United States has every single one of our values under threat. Putin is warning about this, that we are destroying our country with identity politics. We're attacking the family. We're attacking God. We're attacking our traditional values. If the United States is destabilized, then the rest of the world is destabilized. If our government is controlled by Satanists who have nuclear weapons at their control, in a cabal that thinks we need to depopulate and does not believe in God, World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab's, Bill Gates, the entire crew of them, if I add John Kerry into this cabal, there's many of them, they would destroy a nuclear, they only are capable of destruction. And their obsession with destroying life is frightening. Only God can give life. These people do not have a right to take life away. So what was going on yesterday is the beginning of an end game that's going to be played out. And I think that we are at a greater risk of nuclear war when it's being talked about in position like this than we have ever been. And it could happen. I think our government is crazy enough to be run by the Obamas of the world who have always hated America. And how this is going to play out with Joe Biden is now to be seen in the next few days, because the move by the Department of Justice to declare that Biden is mentally diminished and is receding fast into dementia is an obvious indication of exercising the 25th Amendment to remove him from power. But that would put Kamala Harris in as president, and they don't want to do that. So the Democratic Party is now stuck with how do they get rid of Biden. And I think Michelle Obama is waiting in the wings to come and say, all this chaos, I'll come and save the party. I'll run for president. But the presidential election is not for a while. It won't be until November. This is now February. We're not even at the middle of February. We're just starting spring training in baseball. We won't vote until we have an entire baseball season played, 150 some games, till we have the playoffs and the World Series. So baseball will be all over, begun and ended, before we vote. It's a lot of time. A lot of things can happen. And in that, what I'm doing today is I'm trying to get you to understand just how serious this is. And as usual, my solution is pretty much the same, which is we need to, in the end, God always wins. God will win here too. Even if there's a nuclear war, God will win. This certainly feels like final days. It's certainly playing out as final days. Our remedy given by the Bible is 2 Chronicles 7:14. Get down on our knees and ask God's forgiveness for letting the world get this crazy. We have killed millions of babies, cutting them apart in the womb. Only God can give life. We do not have the right to take it away. We've taken God out of our schools and put Satan clubs in our schools. This is a disgrace. A country that was founded on God we trust is now turning into on Satan we destroy. And this has to stop. Enough people, I think, are getting awakened instead of woke. And I'm writing books. I've been trying to get this message out now for years. I've been at this for 20 years, and I have never seen it be so critical as it is today. So I'm asking everyone to pray. I'm asking everybody to understand how we must get rid of this neo-Marxism. I applaud Tucker Carlson for going and getting this interview. I can see from Tucker Carlson, he's still sorting it out himself. And if he hears this, it may help him to sort through some of what's going on. And again, as I did with the Mueller investigation, when they had to finally accept that what I was telling them was the truth, I did not have contact with Julian Assange, but I did know before that Assange released his last bit of emails in 2016 that they were going to be Podesta's emails, and I had a pretty good idea what was in them. And it was because I figured it out on an airplane trip our 25th wedding anniversary, to the wife who's now divorcing me after 32 years of marriage, had an affair, decided that was the best thing to do. And so therefore, I figured this out too. And I'm giving you the pieces as I figured them out. And if I'm right, we're going to see much more intensifying of the need and the push to get Victoria Nuland's way to have NATO expand. Russia continuing to plead, don't do it. If we increase the violence in Ukraine and give Zelensky more money to keep corrupt Ukraine open for business, and the businesses they're in are satanic businesses, drugs, laundering money, pedophilia, sex slavery for children. This is a disgrace. And God, I think, is not going to put up with it any longer when the United States of America is getting indoctrinated to abandon God. A country that abandons God has lost its soul. And a country that's lost its soul is on its way to losing its freedom. In this case, maybe to risking a nuclear war, which would be catastrophic on a thermonuclear scale for the entire world population. We've had 5 mass extinctions in Earth's history that we've documented, all of which occurred before human beings got here. This may be the 6th extinction, but it won't become because of climate change, which is a hoax. It will become because of Satan's influence on our leaders and the abandonment of God, which has been going on in this country with neo-Marxist indoctrination going on back into the 1920s. And I document this all if you'll read The Truth about Neo-Marxism, Cultural Maoism, and Anarchy. That book is not easy to read, but it is the code book for understanding what's going on today. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. We're going to wrap up. This is a special presentation. I feel like a prosecution. I'm trying to lay out the indictment of our State Department and CIA. And I'll be coming out with a book very shortly on the JFK assassination, which is going to show that we've been lied to for 60 years. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. We're going to have a featured channel here on CloutHub.com, and I'm encouraging people to watch us on CloutHub.com. We're going to be having a lot of unique programming. We're going to be doing a lot in a much more strategic partnership with CloutHub.com, and I urge you to join us. We'll be doing daily news broadcasts, featured news broadcasts, so we can bring you the most current, up-to-date news with an analysis of what's really going on, rather than the stories you're being told even on Fox News. Dr. Jerome Corsi, today is Friday. It's February 9th, 2024. We'll be back on Monday. We're doing these podcasts every weekday. Thank you for joining us. God bless.